excited to be here, and I want to do a really great job with David. So I brought my note cards because this is the first time I'm giving this talk. So, like he said, I am the Director of Community at Spark Capital, and we are a venture capital firm. So I never thought I would go from nonprofit to finance, but here I am. We invest in early stage tech startups. And what that really means is we invest in entrepreneurs who have ideas that often are just a vision, not yet a product, not yet a business. And it's my job to support our entrepreneurs and help them be as successful as possible. And just for context, one of our companies is Twitter, one of our companies is Tumblr, so like no pressure. You know, we help our entrepreneurs be as successful as possible. But the problem is, in the first few months of my job, when I joined about a year ago, I totally bombed one of my first initiatives. So, we have companies across the globe. That was on repeat, by the way, and a designer friend helped me design these slides, and I was like, maybe one rotation is enough. So hopefully that had the impact it meant to. But we have 65 startups, and they're across the United States, they're in Israel, they're in Europe, and of course I thought right away, like, I need to support everyone in all of our companies across the world. How am I going to do that? I'm going to use the internet. And so I researched a ton of different platforms for video conferencing and for live stream, and I came up with this idea. It was almost like my poor man's Reddit AMA, but through Google Hangouts, and I got together a bunch of experts in topics that I thought our companies would be thinking about and need help on. And I prepped them, we asked our community members to submit questions, I tried to find times that would work for our global community to get on the Google Hangouts. Ultimately, I spent dozens of hours preparing these Google Hangouts, trying to create a program around them, all towards helping our entire international community of entrepreneurs. And basically no one showed up. Every time. I did this like 4 or 5 times, and almost every time no one showed up. And that was a big bummer. So I think the problem, I now know the problem, is that I didn't ask anyone, like, first of all, like, do you even care? Do you have challenges that this would be solving? Is this the kind of work that you'd be interested in participating in? Will it meet your needs? And I got so kind of delusional that I just kept doing it because I was convinced that to serve my needs, it helped me help my global community, and it was really good content, and I had great experts on board. Like, the more I did it, the more likely it would be that people would join in, and they too would understand that this was a great idea. And, you know, that just didn't happen. So, when I had that moment of realization, I actually just stopped cold turkey. Like, I stopped doing these monthly Google Hangouts, and no one even came up. No one noticed. And that's when I remembered my trusty old friend, customer development. So like David said, before I was at Spark Capital, I was actually at one of our portfolio companies called Skillshare. And we were a very kind of design-focused, product-oriented company. And this is something that I learned there. Basically what it is a product development philosophy and method that's rooted in understanding what it is your customers want before you start building. Communities like products fail to develop because we fail to develop the members for them, or the buyers. It's about checking our theories against reality. I thought I knew what was going to be real. It didn't turn out that way. And it matters just as much for communities as it does for products. Ultimately, it's about what I call community market fit. The jargon formerly known as product market fit. And it's really about that moment when you know everything's coming together and is working, and for a product, when people are willing to pay for it, essentially. When there's enough value that they will fork over their hard-earned money or time as community members to participate, to lead, and to take it on. So there are 3 principles that I've adapted from the customer development model that have really worked for me in community building, and I want to run you guys through those. So the first is get out of the building, literally. This is about testing your hypotheses, not just in your own little science lab, in your office, at your desk, but actually out there in the world with the users or customers or community members who will be consuming whatever it is that you're creating for them. The next is about identifying your community or identifying your market, essentially. And this is about taking what you learn initially and finding your first community members to get on board. So you have to ask yourself, this is kind of from the product language, what's the minimum feature set I need to get early community members on board? What's like the bare minimum V.00001 that I need to prove that this is something people want? And then finally, there's this awesome loop, the build, measure, learn loop, where you start to try stuff. But as you try, you measure whether or not it's succeeding. And the key piece there is that you have to know what your metric of success is. So you have to know what it is you're looking for that will indicate success. Maybe that's attendance at events. Maybe it's, engagement in forum commenting, whatever it is. But you got to know what success looks like. And then once you see something starting to take off, learn what's not working about it, what can be improved, and add on and keep doing the cycle over and over and over again. The ultimate goal being scalability. Like you figure out what's working and then you scale it from city to city, globally, whatever it is that you're looking to do. So just to recap, from the get-go, the most important thing that I learned is you have to find out what the people you're serving need and what it is that they want before you start building. So you have to do this before you take action. I think Steve Blake, who's the godfather of customer development, says it a little bit more harshly, but perhaps better. This is about finding out whether or not what you think is the truth is actually a bit of a delusion. So I'm going to talk you through what my experience has been like in the past year at Spark. When I started as the director of community, I was the first non-investor at Spark. There's literally never been anyone at this venture capital firm who did anything other than invest. They've done a great job at that. But because of that, I don't have a boss. No one tells me what to do. I have a blank canvas. But the problem is I don't have a boss. No one tells me what to do, and I have a blank canvas. So when I started, I had tons of questions. Things like, do I just support the CEOs across the portfolio companies? Or do I also support the people like me when I was at Skillshare? Early employees who aren't CEOs but still need tons of help. Do I support our global community, or do I focus on New York because that's where I live? Do they want to participate in things online? Do they want to get together in person? Do people across our companies already know each other? If so, how? Like, where are they talking? Are they getting together? The list just goes on and on and on and on. So, I did the easy thing. I didn't try to answer my question myself. I mean, I did, and then you saw what happened. So I rethought my method, and I actually just got out of the building. So I spent about 2 months visiting as many people from our portfolio companies as I could. I went to all the cities I could make my way to. I unfortunately did not spend a trip to Tel Aviv in my first couple months on the job. But I got to Boston, I got to LA, I got to San Francisco, I met companies in New York, and I just asked people, where's Robin? That, like, the exact question that Robin suggested, like, what are your challenges? Forget Spark, forget my job and my needs, like, just what are your biggest challenges as a founder, as an early startup employee? And I followed up too. I said, like, what are you already doing to solve those problems? And that's something that I learned from this product development model. And I also did come in with some assumptions. And so once I kind of learned from people as I went what they needed, I was starting to form my own ideas of what I could do to help them. And so little by little, I also kind of built that into the conversations. I let them talk, and then I said, interesting, like I have a couple of ideas about how I might be able to help. Am I on the right track? Like, would these things help solve your problems? And I heard two big things. Number one, it didn't matter what type of company it was, it didn't matter what city they were in, all of our entrepreneurs felt incredibly alone. Even if we were helping them do what they needed to do. And they just wanted to know more people who were going through what they were going through. So thing number one, just more peer-to-peer connections. That's what they wanted. And thing number two, they wanted more time. I had no idea what that meant, but I kept hearing it again and again and again. Like, if I just had more time, I knew I couldn't give them more hours in the day, but I asked why a lot of times. Like, why do you need more time? What would you do with that? And what I ultimately learned is that they are climbing an incredibly steep learning curve. They're learning by doing, and we've given them, $1.5 million to start their business, and they feel pressured to give it back as fast as possible. So really what that meant was, like, help me climb this steep learning curve so that I can do better faster. It was really helpful to get in front of people face to face and, like, literally step outside of my office and meet them, but that wasn't enough. I didn't reach everyone. Like, I went to the offices of the people who responded to my emails, but there were more people who I know I wasn't hearing from. So, being the daughter of a statistician, I put together a survey. And this is really important because it allowed me to reach people other than just the few vocal voices that I was able to get in touch with in person. It also allowed me to learn from people who were in Berlin and London and other places that I couldn't get to. And I tried to be as actionable as possible. So I asked them questions like, other than CEOs, in which priority order should I help these other job functions? Tech, product, customer support, etc. Of these 10 event formats, which 3 are, like, the most relevant to you? How often would you attend an event? Weekly, quarterly, yearly, etc. And I'll just tell you some of the things I learned, because they were super helpful and pretty much informed my entire community strategy. So I heard from them that branding and goal setting were, like, the biggest challenges for them. They didn't know a lot about that stuff. They needed to learn more, and it was really important to them early on in their companies. I learned that all-day summits and in-person evening events were of the most interest to them. And, like, this sounds so tiny, but I didn't have to guess. Like, once I learned this from them, I was able to just collate all that information and come up with a program. When there was information to be shared, they wanted it shared through email. I would not have guessed that at first. I want to protect their inboxes, but they said they wanted newsletters. So this is getting out of the building. A couple of best practices before we get to the next step. So number 1, know your hypotheses. I know I talked a lot about being open-minded and going in and listening and learning from your community members, but part of the product development kind of model that customer development is built around is you also should know as you go what you think the solutions are going to be based on what you're learning, and then just repeat them back and get validation. So know your hypotheses. 2, ask lots of questions. So even if you think you get the answer right away, you probably haven't. You have to dig a little bit deeper to understand the root cause or the root challenge, like my issue with understanding why people needed more time. And then finally, if you are going to send surveys, make your questions actionable. If you're asking a question that you don't know what you'll do with the answer, it's a waste of your time, it's a waste of their time. So identifying your community. This is, again, in the product context, it's about identifying your market. Like, are there people who want what you're building? So I listened, and I started coming up with a few ideas, but the next step was to figure out, would anyone engage with the ideas that I thought represented what they needed and wanted? So I picked 3 different programs, my 3 MVPs, my minimum viable products. So basically, the bare minimum I could do that would be of value just to test, like, is this actually what people want? So one thing I did was I created Google Groups. I looked at every platform that I'm sure you guys have looked at, and some were expensive, some had a million features that I knew I wasn't going to use yet, and some just looked like others, and I couldn't decide what would be best. So I picked Google Groups because they were super easy to set up. They were already native to people's daily communication process and email. And if it didn't work, it wouldn't be that hard to just abandon them. And I created a Google group for every job function that I learned people thought mattered in terms of support. And to build trust and encourage people to talk in those Google groups and actually share their challenges and give advice, I also started organizing breakfasts, just social networking breakfasts for people within each Google group. I also started a skill-based event series. So based on the topics that I learned from them were the most challenging, I started creating essentially classes that I invited entrepreneurs whom I knew were specifically dealing with that challenge. So positioning, for example, was all marketing people and all CEOs, but no one else. Targeted skill-based workshops. And that was meant to bring them together in a targeted way, but also speed up their learning curves, because that's what I learned was really important to them. And then finally, from an information sharing perspective, again, used a super ugly, simple tool. I created a Google site, a wiki. I did not do anything to the look of it. It's just gray. And it was a repository for information that I could then refer to in newsletters and digests that I would send them. So the good news is, I think about, like in the first month of trying that stuff, we had about 25 to 30 self-introductions in our tech Google group right away. I just asked people to say who they were and what their biggest challenges were, and like off they went. We had about 30 people attend the first Spark Sessions workshop around positioning and branding. And so I started to see, like, yes, people are picking up on this. They're interested. There's a lot I can improve, but it's not crickets. It's not like the Google Hangouts. A couple of best practices. The main one is just keep it simple. Once you've done your learning, that's great. That's step one. But you're going to have to make lots of changes, and you don't want to make it painful for yourself. You also don't want to make it painful for your community members. So don't spend 6 months building a really complicated, sophisticated product only to learn that no one shows up to use it. So keep it super simple, just like the Google groups. Do what you can to test your ideas without putting in more investment than is worth it. And then also, like I was saying before, you got to know what success looks like. So for me, it was largely about attendance. Who showed up at the initial workshop, who showed up at the breakfasts, and did people even care to introduce themselves in the Google groups. So I had my numbers, I saw that I met them, and I moved on. So the final piece is this never-ending build, measure, learn loop, so learn to love it. I identified the problems that my community needed solving. They needed more time, and they needed more interaction with each other. And I did get my first group of kind of engaged, excited community members on board, but that was just the beginning. That's what I call now my MVC, my minimum viable community. So I knew I had something there, but I'm in a constant process of iterating and improving and trying to scale. And actually, this is something I was talking about with a group in our breakout sessions. Scaling is the ultimate challenge. I do have a global community. I am the only one doing what I'm doing, but I know that if stuff is working, I need to find a way to make it work for everyone. So I have to iterate and get feedback over and over and over again. And I want to just walk you through one series called the Spark Sessions, which I just mentioned. These are the targeted kind of skill-based workshops, and just show you how many things did not work and how often I've had to ask for feedback to get it to a place where I genuinely feel like I'm creating a valuable program and product for my community that they care about and that's worth scaling. So the very first workshop I did was on positioning and branding. And that totally came from what I learned from them that they wanted to know more about. And against their wishes, I planned it as a morning event, even though they told me they wanted to do evenings. And to be honest, I can't even remember why I did that. I really can't. I think I thought, no one's going to come in the evening, work is busy, they say they want to come, but they'll change their mind last minute. So I totally ignored them, and I hosted it in the morning. And I invited some awesome, celeb-level entrepreneur speakers. Neil Blumenthal from Warby Parker, which is one of our portfolio companies, came and talked about Warby's branding, which is amazing. And he spoke for about half an hour, as did the other speaker that I had. And there was a little bit of time for mingling at the end, and then that was it. And we filmed it. I hired kind of an amateur videographer to come film it. And I sent a feedback survey very soon after the event. And I basically heard a resounding message, which is that, we love Neil, and, the other speaker was really valuable, but we don't want to sit around for an hour listening to people talk. We want to talk to each other. That's why we came. We wanted to meet other CEOs and other marketing people who could help us with our challenges. So the next event that I did was on goal setting, because that was the other topic people said they really wanted to learn more about. And more people showed up. I think, after the first event, the people who I initially invited who didn't come started to hear from their peers in the portfolio, yeah, this is good stuff, you should come, they invite good people. I hosted it in the evening. I also did get that feedback. People said, it was great, but we don't usually get it. early, you work in startups, you don't want to go to an 8 a.m. workshop. And they also didn't have time to talk to each other afterwards. They had to run right to work. So I hosted it in the evening and I listened and more people came. And instead of having people just listen to speakers, I added on breakout group discussions. And I still had the speakers talk for like half an hour each. It was really hard to get them to not talk. And I also convinced myself, this is great content. Like I know people think they don't want to hear a lot, but there's so much to share. So I still had the speakers talk for half an hour each. And then I tacked on breakout groups. And what I learned after I sent the same exact feedback survey that I sent after the first event for consistency's sake, and so I could measure my improvement if it was there, I learned people were really happy I did the event in the evening. They stuck around. I saw that anecdotally, but also in my survey. But that they still did not want to listen to people talk for an hour, and that the breakout groups were lovely, but like a little bit too informal. So the very next event I did was on leadership and management, and again, that came from what I learned from them they wanted to hear. And instead of having speakers talk for 30 minutes, even though they were super awesome speakers, I literally ripped them off stage after 15 minutes, and I just said to them, like, this is what our audience wants. Are you cool with that? And so they adapted their talks and they made it work. And I brought on facilitators for each breakout group. So people who could just kind of guide the discussion and save the groups the 5 minutes it would take to figure out who the organic leader was, et cetera, et cetera. And every time I did the event, I learned more and more. I did a feedback survey again, and the next one is going to be in about a month. And I'm basically going to repeat all the stuff that I now know has worked. Breakout group facilitators, the evening time, but I have new stuff to try. You know, people still thought the breakout groups were not as guided as they had hoped they would be, and so we'll do a little bit of unconferencing voting. The point is, I've been doing this for a year, and like even still, it's not 100% there yet. Like I'm not ready to share the playbook with anyone to just do. So the build, measure, learn loop, like I said, is never ending. But there are a few important best practices that I've learned along the way, and that come from the customer development model. One of them is report back. So I actually feel like I take a lot from my community. And I want them to know how thankful I am, but I also want them to know, like Rich said, the impact that they're having on the rest of the community so that they feel engaged. So the first one is like report back. If I'm sending them feedback surveys and I'm asking them to spend 5 minutes answering questions about my programs that I came up with for them, they deserve to know how thankful I am and also what changes I'm implementing, especially if they came up with that. And I think that really breeds ownership and investment because they see that I'm trying to do what they want, not what I think is best. The second is writing a playbook. So there were a couple of people in here who run like, what was it, 50 million person communities, 10 million person communities. Right now my community is 65 companies, probably under a couple thousand people, but the more I can do things that I can put into a playbook or a handbook or a how-to, the closer I feel I'm getting to actually passing on leadership to people in the community. And that's what's happened with those morning breakfasts that we do. So I don't plan those anymore. The people in our community plan them, and they just have a host how-to based on a year's worth of learning. It's like now we know it works. So as soon as you do something twice, write it down and have your checklist about what works. And then the final thing is just trust your gut. So one of the tricky things about customer development that you'll read anywhere you look it up is when you hit product market fit or community market fit, everyone says like you just know it. Like reviews start being incredible and orders start pouring in and people show up. And it's hard to look for that until it happens, but the truth is you do know and you should trust your gut. And the same goes to the other way. Like if people aren't showing up for your Google Hangouts, it is you. So what's next? Even though this build, measure, learn loop is going to keep going, and even after I get close to perfecting certain programs, I'm going to start new initiatives. It's all about getting people to not just come the first time, like you heard, but to come back again and again, and eventually start to take leadership and ownership so that you can scale through that, through your community. So I've laid the foundation. I've got basic stuff going on. I've been here for a year. I feel like people are talking to each other. They're climbing their learning curve steeper. But I'm certainly not done. And to me, the ultimate validation is going to be them sticking around and also raising their hand and saying, like, I want to lead that breakfast. Here's what I think you could do to make the workshops better, and to scale them globally. So the good news is, like I said, I've got 17 breakfasts next week happening that I did not organize at all. I'm just writing the check. And people are taking them to totally new levels. One breakfast is actually being hosted in a distillery, and there's going to be a talk, and it's a small business in LA. It's the only one in the city. I wouldn't have been able to do that on my own. I can't do that 20 times over. But the host, who's a member of our community, can. So now I'm free to plan our CEO Summit and see what I get wrong so that I can do it better and better every year from now. And I think the ultimate message here is that we all be as humble as we possibly can be, and basically realize at the end of the day that we're just here to implement what it is that our community needs. And we can also be as lazy as we want, because if we ask them what they want and we deliver it, that's really when we're providing value. So I hope we'll all do that. I'm happy to talk more about my failures, because there are plenty of others I didn't get the chance to share. But thank you for listening to this one.